We just stepped on their face with a hobnail boot and broke their nose. We just crushed their face.
What's up, guys? This is the Glory UGA podcast brought to you by our great friends at Alumni Hall. And on today's video, we're going to continue my 2025 Georgia football position unit preview series with an in-depth look at Georgia's linebackers ahead of the start of fall camp, which, don't look now, guys, is just a few short weeks away, which is incredible news, guys. We're so close. But before we get there, all you diehard George fans, make sure you know that everything we do here on this channel is designed for you. So go ahead, subscribe to the channel right now, turn those notifications on. If you enjoyed today's video, like the video, comment, let me know what you think about Georgia's linebackers. I would love to hear from each and every one of you out there. But all right, let's go ahead and dive in. We got a lot to talk about, a lot of players to break down on today's show. So let's get going. And off the top here, I want to start by saying something that I personally wholeheartedly believe in. But I also know at the same time, this is something that some people out there, probably some of you watching, are going to have an issue of sorts with. So I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I personally believe that Georgia's linebackers in 2025 might just be the single most talented position unit in all of college football. And look, guys, I know that's controversial to a degree because at the current moment in time, I would absolutely agree with saying that the talent in that room exceeds the production at this point. But it's one of those things that, like, if you know, you know. And I know a lot of you Georgia diehards out there, you know the type of talent that we have amassed in this room at both inside linebacker and the jack linebacker position. And yes, we're going to throw them all together today because we're running short on time. We want to preview all these positions, so we're going to do all the linebackers together. So yeah, I know that right now, as a whole, whether you're looking at Georgia inside linebackers or Georgia outside linebackers, that jack linebacker position, we are admittedly short on established stars. Names that the average college football fan, run-of-the-mill college football fan out there that doesn't really start paying attention to like August, they don't really know their names right now. But again, if you know, you know. And look, there are other very extremely talented positions out there across the country. You look at Ohio State with Jeremiah Smith, the group of receivers they have, that's an incredibly talented position unit. If you look at like Penn State, their running backs with Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, that's as good of a running back duo that there is in college football, at least coming into the season. Clemson's defensive line, all across that defensive line. They're stacked. They're loaded. So, of course, there are plenty of other extremely talented position units out there. But again, I would argue that you'd be really hard-pressed to find any unit out there in all of America that's more talented than this Georgia linebacker unit. I know, again, production and talent can be different because we had a lot of young talent in that room. A lot of guys that I think are poised to have breakout years. But if you look at what Georgia has in its linebacker unit, 4 former 5-stars, 2 former number 1 inside linebackers among its ranks, I would argue at the very least, Georgia's linebacker unit has to be on the short list of most talented units in all of college football. If you don't believe me, if you're not buying it yet, just hear me out. And at the end of the video, if you still don't agree, then you can rip me apart. Just hear me out here, all right? But let's start at the top here with Georgia's inside linebackers. We'll get to the edge players. We'll get to those jack linebackers a little bit later in the show. But we got to start with the headline, who I believe is the headliner for Georgia at inside linebacker entering the 2025 season. It has to be C.J. Allen, who at 6'1", 235, I believe is poised for a big-time, potentially all-SEC, maybe even an outside shot at an All-American caliber year for C.J. Allen. Now, why do I say that? Well, first off, this guy has played a ton of football for Georgia to this point in his career. So if you're talking about guys that might not be firmly established stars, well, CJ is probably the closest that we have to it on this roster at linebacker. Now, does the average college football fan know CJ Allen's name? I don't know. It depends on how closely they watch it. But I think that's going to change this year, right? Because CJ last year played 70% of our defensive snaps. And that's as a sophomore, coming on the heels of a freshman campaign, where he didn't start, didn't play anywhere near 70% of our snaps, but did get a couple of starts due to some injuries later in the year, and was playing from day one for Georgia. You started to hear some buzz about him picking up the system, kind of just being one of those guys, like a football savant, an inside linebacker. You started to hear that a little bit in spring practice ahead of his freshman year. You heard more about it in fall camp. You get to the season, yeah. Lo and behold, he's playing, and he's playing a good number of snaps for Georgia as a true freshman. Now, a lot of people were really high on CJ and what he did as a true freshman. And I thought he did some great things. But I was also at times critical of him as a true freshman. I think maybe one of the few people out there that was, because I think that there were some holes in his game that he needed to address. You clearly saw the talent. You saw the leadership abilities. You saw this guy as a freshman, by the way, which is really hard to come in and play inside linebacker in Georgia's scheme with all that's put on those guys as a true freshman. So all things considered, he did a really good job for Georgia as a freshman. But he also was victimized with poor eye discipline at times. Misdirection got him quite a bit. He wasn't always confident on what to do. He wasn't great in coverage. Playing in space sometimes wasn't an ideal situation for him. I think he struggled at times as a true freshman. But then you fast forward to 2024. And as a sophomore, again, he's playing 70% of Georgia's defensive snaps. And he's a far different player than he was as a true freshman. A lot of those things that I mentioned I thought were issues for him at times as a true freshman, which again, you're a true freshman, like you got to learn. He took his bumps and he was much better. He improved tremendously on some of those areas. I think he certainly needed to improve in 2024. I thought he was far more decisive. I thought he was far better with his eyes. I'm not saying he was perfect and never got fooled, but it was much more rare in 24 than what it was in 23. It was not a common occurrence, which it kind of was in 2023. You go back to the Tennessee game, you go back to the Auburn game. Now, he wasn't the only one that got victimized with poor eyes against Auburn, but he was certainly one of the primary culprits in that game. That wasn't really as much of an issue for him last year, and he got better and better and better at that as the season went on. I thought he was moving better. I thought he was a little slimmer than he was in 2023, got his body in a little bit better shape, and as a result, I thought he was better in space. I thought he moved better sideline to sideline, chasing plays, scraping across the line of scrimmage. I thought he was much better in coverage a year ago. And I think all those things, I think he improved on even more as the season progressed. So that is what gives me cause for encouragement entering the 2025 season, because if he improved that much from the beginning of the 2024 season to the end of last year, what can this guy do with a full offseason under his belt, being like the guy for Georgia at inside linebacker? And I have on pretty good authority, guys, that he ran a very impressive number for a guy that's 6'1", 235. He ran in the low 4.5 range at the Georgia Combine. So we do this every summer, like right before fall camp. We have like our own Georgia football combine, which is not getting guys for the NFL, but it's kind of like practice, getting them like practice for what the real combine will look like. And he ran low 4.5s at 6'1", 235. And if that's legit, which I have good reason to believe it is, that is very encouraging for me. Because CJ, like when he came into college, he was more I always saw him like coming out of high school, more of that like downhill thumper, inside linebacker, old school, traditional between the tackles. That's where he was going to excel. And he certainly has excelled there in that role as a Georgia linebacker. But again, he's gotten his body in better shape. He's improved his athleticism during his time at Georgia. If he's running legit low 4.5s, 4.51, 4.52, 4.53, that could be like first round NFL draft stuff if he takes the step this year, which let's go there next. Year 3 for CJ Allen in the Georgia system as an inside linebacker. We got a year 3 rule, guys. We have 3 inside linebackers at Georgia that have won the Buckus Award in the Kirby Smart, Glenn Schumann era in year 3. Roquan Smith, Nakobe Dean, the last year coach, Jalen Walker. Now, Jalen's a little bit different than all those guys. He was a jack of all trades, used him rushing off the edge. We used him spying the quarterback. He was a different kind of player, but still, the rule applies. The year 3 rule for Georgia inside linebackers, and CJ Allen is more experienced than really just about all those guys coming into his 3rd year. Jalen Walker, guys, go back to the 2023 season. I've said this many times in the show because it still drives me insane. I'll never understand it. The dude played 12 snaps against Alabama in the SEC championship game in 2023. All right, he was a role player. All he did was essentially come in on 3rd downs and rush the passer. That's what he did: rush the passer and mirror the quarterback. He wasn't an every down off ball inside linebacker. Rarely did he play that role. Occasionally, but not very often. He wasn't really part of that rotation. He's more of a third down guy. CJ, as a sophomore, plays 70% of our defensive snaps. So if the year 3 rule applied to all those other guys before him, now I will say Nakobe played a lot as a sophomore as well, but CJ played a ton. And if that rule applied for Jalen Walker, even though he's a little bit of a different player, why can't it apply for CJ Allen? And here's the thing with CJ too, guys. The more I watch him this offseason, going back and rewatching the tape, getting ready for the start of this season so I can do these kind of position previews, so I can do my Scout the Enemy series, which I'm going to open up later this week. I go back and watch a ton of tape during the offseason. I watch all of our games multiple times. And the more I go back and watch our games with a fine-tooth comb, the more I lay eyes and really zero in on CJ Allen. That's what I do. I go every rewatch, I'm focusing on a different position. And when I zero in on linebackers and CJ Allen, the more I watch him, the more I start to believe in CJ Allen being that guy that can take that next step, can take his game to the next level in 2025, have that third-year jump and be an all-SEC, potential all-American caliber linebacker for Georgia, a potential first-round draft pick for Georgia at inside linebacker, another potential first-round draft pick. So I know he might not be a household name yet. I believe that will change this year for Georgia and CJ Allen. Now, his running mate, the guy I project right now, based off what we saw during the spring, to start at inside linebacker alongside CJ, would be Raylan Wilson, who is a guy, if you go back to their high school year, so they're the same class. They both came out in 2023, part of that 2023 class. CJ was a highly recruited guy, but he was not as highly rated as Raylan Wilson was. Raylan was the 5-star. CJ was a high 4-star, highly recruited guy, number 76 nationally, number 6 inside linebacker. But Raylan Wilson was inside the top 30 nationally. He was committed to Michigan. We flipped him late in that cycle. I thought that was a massive get, and I'll just be real with you guys. I know that right now CJ's poised to be the better player this year for Georgia, but coming out of high school, like I'll just tell you straight up, I'm not going to try to hide it. I was more excited about Raylan Wilson. Why? Because he's a supremely gifted athlete. And yes, I do believe he's more physically gifted from an athleticism standpoint than CJ Allen. Now, that doesn't mean he's a better linebacker, right? That's why we start with CJ. But from just a pure physical tool standpoint, I still stand by it that Raylan is a better physical specimen than CJ is. And he's gotten his body up there as well, man. He's in that 6'1", like 230 range. And now he played a fair amount for Georgia, almost 50% of our defensive snaps here, go a little under that at 46%, but that's, again, not quite where Raylan was or where CJ was. Where CJ has an edge over Raylan coming to this year, based off what we saw a year ago, it's in discipline, it's in decisiveness, it's in confidence in the system. That's where Raylan, when he struggles at times, at least in his first 2 years, that's where it is. It's not athletically. The guy is a freak athlete. I do believe he's a better athlete. I think it's pretty clear than CJ is, although CJ is a really good athlete. But he doesn't always play as fast. Like CJ is able to play really fast, at least he was last year, because he knew what was going on. He was confident in the system, that he was able to play decisively and move that way. Raylan didn't always move decisively, didn't always feel comfortable. It's very clear you watch him on tape, wasn't always comfortable with exactly what he was supposed to be doing on a given play. And as a result, he didn't play as fast as he's capable of at times because you're thinking a little too much out there. Even if you're a split second slower, that can be the difference between getting a guy down the ground for a 2-yard gain and a guy busting one for 15, 20 yards, right? And I will also say Raylan improved on his eye discipline. He was another guy as a freshman that was victimized by poor eyes. He improved on that in 2024 as a sophomore, just not as much as CJ did. It's still something that got him from time to time last year. Not as much, but it still got him more than got CJ Allen a year ago. But when Raylan didn't have to worry about misdirection, right? And a lot of times it's with dual threat quarterbacks. Like when teams like, let's say, Alabama, not everybody in our defense got full of poor eyes in that game. But when teams have a dual threat quarterback and they got guys in motion moving left and right all over the place, shifts, motions, exchange, all different things, right? And the quarterback's part of their run game, like a Jalen Milroe or Georgia Tech with Haynes King. Those are kinds of offenses that give Raylan some issues, or at least they have in the past, because his eyes are all over the place, man. He's thinking too much. He doesn't know what's going on. If that can improve this year, if he can become more decisive, more confident in the system. This is a guy that got all those reps in the offseason, more reps in the offseason with the number one offense, the number one defense than he has at any point in his career. So you like to believe that in year 3, he can also take the type of step that maybe a CJ Allen can. If he can do that and become more decisive, more confident in what he's supposed to be doing to give him play, the sky is legitimately the limit for Raylan Wilson as an inside linebacker. He absolutely has first-round talent. He's just got to continue to develop from a technician standpoint and just from like a knowing what to do standpoint. Because when he knows what to do, like for example, both Texas games last year, so when you have a quarterback in Quinn Ewers, who is not a threat throwing the football. And yeah, sure, they do some misdirection. Like Sarkis a great offensive mind, and he uses motions and shifts to kind of create some matchups he wants. But when you don't have the quarterback run threat, Raylan's eyes don't get as easily fooled. And so in both those games, I thought at the time when we played them in Austin, I came on the podcast was it last October and said, I think this is the best game Ray Wilson's ever played. And then you fast forward in the season, in the SEC championship game, I thought it was maybe the second best game the guy ever played. Because when he can play see-ball, get ball, he can get ball. Like the dude is a legit athlete. So I'm very excited about what he can do with another year of improvement under his belt. But like, just to give you guys an example of what I'm talking about with the kind of athleticism that Raylan Wilson has. So CJ Allen's reportedly run like in the low 4.5s at the Georgia combine ahead of fall camp as a going into his junior year. Well, Raylan Wilson ran a 4.52 in high school. It's likely right now that Raylan's probably running in the 4.4 range, mid to high 4.4 range would be my guess right now. The guy is a supremely gifted athlete. It's just a matter of putting it all together. If that happens for him this year, watch out. Georgia will have the 2 most talented inside linebackers in the country, potentially. I think it's a very strong case that could happen. But here's the thing, guys. If we stopped right there, you could make a really strong argument for Georgia's inside linebackers to be one of the more talented units in the country. If we stop right there, but we're not stopping right there because it's far more than just the headliners. Because behind them, I think you have a couple of guys that could potentially give them another year or so, end up being better players than either CJ or Raylan could be. And I believe those guys are going to be awesome for Georgia, as I just laid out. But we got 2 sophomores, 2 former 5-star sophomores that I think are both poised for big breakout years for Georgia. And I didn't know what, so I've been doing my top 5 series as well. I did my top 5 breakout players. I did my top 5 sleeper players. And I didn't know what to do with these 2 guys because I don't think they're sleeper players because they're former 5-stars. And I think there's a lot of expectations in the Georgia fan base for them. So can they be sleepers if they were that big of recruits coming out of high school? I don't really think so. But are they going to play enough when you have guys like Raylan Wilson and CJ Allen ahead of them right now at inside linebacker? Are they going to play enough to qualify what I qualify as breakout players, which are guys that are going to become household names across all college football? Like the average college football fan will know their names. I don't know if they'll play enough for that, but the possibility certainly does exist. But Chris Cole and Justin Williams, again, 2 former 5-stars in the 2024 class at inside linebacker, who I think are going to do big things for Georgia in 2025. But they're a little bit different, all right? Chris Cole, the name of the game for Chris Cole is versatility. Of all the inside linebackers that we have in our room, I think he's probably the closest to Jalen Walker that we currently have on the roster right now. But that's not to say he is Jalen Walker. He's still a little bit different. He's taller and longer than Jalen Walker. So physically looking, he's a little bit different. But he's also, like Jalen, explosive. He's rangy. He's got great athleticism. He's got the ability to rush the passer off the edge, but also has the ability to play off the ball, inside linebacker, can play in space, can function out there, can mirror the quarterback, spy the quarterback, whatever phrase you want to use there. All those things that Jalen did and the roles that Jalen played for us in our defense, Chris Cole can play those same roles. He just looks a little different when he does it. But this guy's 6'3", 235, right? Like Jalen was stalled off, and I love Jalen. I told you guys coming in last year that Jalen was like my number 1 breakout player for Georgia. And that, you get some right, you get some wrong. Got that one right. But Chris Cole, man, he's not stalled off like that, but again, he can do a lot of the same things. Now, he did play some for Georgia last year, right? Because we had some injuries inside linebacker. Smile Munden missed some time in the middle of the year. Didn't play a ton, but played some. Got his feet wet. Played 11% of our total defensive snaps a year ago. But this year, I think he's poised for a much bigger role. Because with Jalen Walker moving on, even though you have CJ Allen and you have Raylan Wilson, that doesn't preclude Chris Cole from being on the field. Because again, the versatility. You can line him up on the edge. Like we'll get to Jack linebacker here in a minute. Chris Cole can play jack linebacker for Georgia situationally, and I fully expect him to do that situationally. I think situationally, Chris Cole can play star defender for Georgia. If we're playing teams that are heavy 12 personnel and like to run the football, Chris Cole, I believe, would be a great fit at star situationally against those kinds of offenses, certainly on first, second down, the standard downs when they are more apt to run the football. Why? Because if you have a guy at 6'3", 235 that can also function effectively in space, that's kind of how we used him last year, guys. Yeah, he rushed the passer. He also dropped into coverages and played in space quite a bit on those third downs, guys. Like, he did a really good job of shutting down Gunnar Helm for the most part on those third downs when he was playing against Texas in that first go-around, which is the first time you really saw a lot of action on the field against a real opponent, like real meaningful situations. He's absolutely got the ability to play in space and cover in space. Now, do I want him covering like a speedy, shifty 5'10", 165-pound slot receiver? No. That's why, like, if a team's in 11 personnel, then I probably don't want him at star. But if they're in 12 personnel and there is no slot receiver on the field, and there's a tight end in his place, then yeah, he absolutely can stay with about any tight end in the country. And that's where I do think he has an edge over Jalen. Like, Jalen wasn't great in coverage. Like, that's one area where teams did try to exploit him. Cole's different. Like, he that's one area where he might not be as dynamic of a pass rusher as Jalen Walker was off the edge, but not all that far off. And I do think he's better in space in terms of like covering guys out there in space. Now, Jalen was also elite playing that spy mirror role in the quarterback. I think Chris can play that as well. Will he play as well as Jalen? I don't know if he's a shot out of a cannon as much as Jalen is, but again, if he's not, it's not all that far off. So I think he can play star for us because I think he can function out there in space against 12 personnel against tight ends, but also gives you a much better chance to defend the run when teams are in 12 personnel because our star defender is going to have run fits in the box. And you have a guy that's 6'3", 235, yeah, I feel good about that. We can also function effectively out there in coverage. And this is a guy, go back to some of the combine numbers, allegedly put up like a 10.5 broad jump at the Georgia Combine ahead of fall camp, which if that's true, that would have been good for the third highest broad jump among all inside linebackers that did the actual NFL Combine a couple months ago, right? And this is a true sophomore. Just let that soak in for a minute, all right? This guy is a legit athlete. In high school, he was a big-time track guy. He was fourth in the 60-meter hurdles as a junior in high school at the Nike National Indoor Track Championships. We're not talking about just some like local school district championship, like region championship. We're talking about the Nike National Indoor Track Championships, fourth in the 60-meter hurdle. This guy is a legit athlete, an insane length, insane wingspan. The versatility is off the charts. He's going to do big things for Georgia. I'm very excited to see how we use him, but since we can use him in so many different ways, I do think he's going to play a lot for Georgia in 2025. And then the other guy that was a five-star at inside linebacker coming out of the 2024 recruiting class was Justin Williams. In fact, Justin Williams was not only a five-star, he was a top 10 player nationally and the number one inside linebacker in the country coming out in that 2024 class. Now, with Williams, the difference here, he's long. That's one thing that him and Cole both have in common. They're both very, very long. But Williams has a slider frame. He's not as well put together, at least as a freshman. He wasn't 6'2", about 215, 220 in that range. Now, if you've seen some pictures on social media this offseason, like this summer, it looks like he's gotten his body put together and put some more weight on. I want to see what that looks like in pads. But during the spring, he got bigger than what we saw from him a year ago in 2024 as a true freshman, but still maybe not as big as I would like him to be. But this guy was a breakout player from Georgia spring practice sessions. He was the guy that, like, almost from day one, there were a couple of guys. Bo Walker was one of them. Justin Williams was one. Chris Cole was certainly one of those guys. You go back, Jeremy Bell at wide receiver. I know he's a walk-on, but he's one of those guys. There's always a few players that you hear buzz about almost immediately, and Justin Williams was one of those guys. And that buzz never really abated. It never really let up. And if anything, it just got louder and louder and louder. And I see him at practice, like, okay, yeah, like he's starting to figure this out. You see him at G-Day, he looked even better than when I saw him a couple weeks prior to that. Now, he didn't play a lot last year. Like, Cole didn't play a ton, played 11% of our defensive snaps, but Justin Williams only played 24 snaps total last year. So he did not play a lot. That's 2% of our defensive snaps. He plays some special teams for us, but only 2% of our defensive snaps. So this is, guys, kind of what I'm talking about. Like, we're short on, like, we don't have the established stars right now, but we have this talent. And that's what I'm talking about. And that's what I'm arguing, guys. I'm saying that Georgia's inside linebackers, our linebacker unit as a whole, if you throw in the Jack linebackers, is as talented as any unit in the country. The production doesn't match it yet, but I think that's coming. Just be patient. Give it like, I don't know, a couple of months. And I think that production's really going to start to catch up with the talent in this room. And then if you go beyond them, we got a couple of freshmen. Zayden Walker is also a #1 inside linebacker in the country coming out in this 2025 recruiting class, number 28 prospect nationally. Anthony Crew is a guy that wasn't as highly rated, but I really, really like his skills, like his talent coming out of high school. He's a 4-star, number 355 nationally. He's a guy I would say, I know he's ranked 355, and you kind of just shrugged it off and say, whatever, you dismissed that. Turn on the tape. Turn on the tape of Anthony Crew, and you just make up your own mind and tell me what you see. Because what I see is a dude that can be a star for Georgia in a couple of years. But as high as I am on both Walker and Crew, barring injury, which, knock on wood, things happen, like we've seen it year in, year out, they're not going to factor in. Ideally, they're not going to factor in, if we can stay healthy, because you got a solid 4 deep at inside linebacker there. You have a 4-man rotation with C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson, Chris Cole, and Justin Williams. I don't think Cole or Williams will push to start, but I do think they're going to be in a rotation. I do think that we'll rotate liberally there like we have for a couple of years. We have guys that we trust, guys that we believe in, guys that we think need to see the field. We play them at inside linebacker. And I think that's very much going to be the case this year. So Walker and Crew are probably not going to play a lot this year, but they're still extraordinarily talented. And if pressed into duty, they might not always know what to do as freshmen, but the talent is certainly there. All right, let's move to the Jack linebacker position. And I think this is an intriguing position for Georgia. Now, this was a spot where we had a big need in the transfer portal after losing some guys in the NFL draft. A couple guys left early, some guys who's lost their eligibility. You have a guy like Damon Wilson Jr., who were kind of like grooming to be that next guy at the edge. Well, he decides he wants to transfer out. He ends up at Missouri, right? So all of a sudden, Georgia's like, whoa, 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 whoa. A position that was a strength for us is now like, you don't want to say glaring weakness, but certainly a question because we are short on bodies there. Like we need to get some dudes in that room that can help us win. And so I look at the Jack linebacker room and I see this room as kind of like a microcosm of the Georgia team at large entering the 2025 season. I say that because, again, going back to what I said with the inside linebackers, there's not as much experience in this room. Like on this Georgia team at large, like we don't have a ton of like big time returning players. A lot of our top players from a year ago have gone in the NFL draft. They've left, right? So we're short on established stars ahead of the season. But what we are emphatically not short on, whether it's inside linebacker or Jack linebacker, is talent. We have plenty of options to step up, even though they haven't necessarily done it yet, and the production's hasn't been there yet, and the average college fan out there doesn't know their names yet. That doesn't mean they won't know their names because there's tons of talent in this room. There's a number of options that could step up and break out for Georgia at Jack linebacker this year. And we got to start with the transfer from Army, Elo Mendoza. So yeah, we were short on bodies there. Like we need to go out and find not just bodies, we need to find some dudes in the transfer portal. And we went out and got one of the top guys at that edge rusher position in the transfer portal in that spring window in Mendoza. 6'3", 245. If you go back and watch tape at Army, this guy has elite athleticism, elite explosiveness and twitch in his game off the edge. He's a legit pass rusher off the edge for Georgia. And he's not the biggest guy at 6'3", 245, but he plays with some physicality. And to give you an idea of how athletic Mendoza is, this is a guy coming out of high school, coming into college, was a receiver. But he talked the coaches at Army into letting him try defense. They kind of reluctantly allowed him to try that, and the rest is history. He was just a stud almost right away. And he's gotten bigger and stronger, and he continues to do that. And I know that the questions are certainly there. Like, okay, you're at Army, you're in the AAC, the G5, now you're jumping to the SEC, to big boy football. And that's a jump, right? So it's fair to have some questions. How will he translate? But what I can tell you is that the coaches love this guy, all right? And I haven't seen him in a Georgia uniform. I haven't really seen him in SEC competition. But watching him in Army, he was a difference maker. He has that kind of difference-making athleticism. I think he can give us pass rush off the edge. I think he's good setting the edge against the run. I would right now project him to be the starter for Georgia at that Jack linebacker position, even though he hasn't been here with Georgia at all. And so I know that's going out on somewhat of a limb because he hasn't practiced a single day with Georgia yet, and you got to learn the system. And Kirby's not going to throw somebody out there that he does not trust. So he's going to have his work cut out for him. Like, obviously, he's been on campus trying to learn the system already. but wasn't here for the spring. Fall camp, he's going to have to get up to speed really, really quickly. But I do think that this guy, as the season wears on, he's going to become more and more comfortable in our system. And I think he's going to be a big-time pass rushing threat for Georgia at that edge position. Now, the guy that got a ton of reps with the number one offense, most of the reps with the number one offense for Georgia at the jack linebacker position during the spring, by necessity, because we shouldn't have bodies, was Quintavious Johnson, who's a guy, go back to his freshman year, fall camp, just about this time a year ago, was starting to build some buzz himself. And you're kind of like, well, I mean, okay, personally, I didn't expect to hear that about Quintavious Johnson as a freshman, like even at practice, because he was a guy that you come out of high school, you watch his tape, okay, I see the skill set, I see the athleticism, I see the potential, but you're raw, like, and you got a ways to go from a developmental standpoint. So I was more than slightly surprised to hear that buzz start to build about Quintavious Johnson back last fall. Then I went to a fall camp practice last year, and I could see with my own two eyes. It's like, okay, I see it. I see it. Still didn't think he was going to play a lot because we were just so stacked and loaded at that position with guys like Chaz Chambliss and Jalen Walker, and you got Damon Wilson, and of course Michael Williams played that position situationally. I just didn't see where he would get reps, and he didn't really, right? But that doesn't mean that he wasn't showing some good things as a true freshman, right? And he also a guy that kind of put his head down, went to worked on the scout team a lot during the season last year, and just got better. And the fact that he got all those reps with the number one defense throughout the spring, all that did is it served to even further accelerate his development. I still don't know where he is right now in his development. I liked what I saw at practice. I liked what I saw at G-Day, but those are somewhat controlled, right? What happens when you're put out there in a real game against Tennessee week 3, right? Because we just don't know. We haven't seen him. We haven't seen him out there on the field in that kind of situation. So we don't know. But everything I have seen of him to this point, which admittedly is not much, but what I've seen at practice, at G-Day, at scrimmages, what you hear from people around the program is that they believe in this guy. And at 6'4", 255, he has the length, he has the athleticism, is good and strong at the point of attack. He's going to play a lot for Georgia at that edge position, at the jack linebacker. Could he start? It wouldn't shock me just by default saying we trust you more. You've been in the system, and we want to reward you for that. And maybe just Mendoza might not start because of that, but he still plays a ton. And then you kind of see how they play out there, and then you figure it out after the first couple of games. So it wouldn't shock me if game 1 it is Quintavious Johnson out there. I think Mendoza's probably the one this year that's closer to being ready to be an impact player for us, just because he's played more. He's more of a veteran. But Quintavious Johnson's a talented player. Now, behind those two, I do think there are some question marks from a depth standpoint. I still think we're kind of light on depth there. But a guy that I'm very intrigued by, that we moved actually from inside linebackers. We're so stacked there. We recruited Chris Jones out of the state of Virginia as an inside linebacker coming out of high school. But we're just stacked there, and the guy's talented, and you want to find a way for him to get on the field. So, and when you're short at the edge, why not give the guy a shot there? So at 6'2", 230, he got moved there during the spring. And I was kind of skeptical right away. It's like, I don't know how much we can expect from him right now. This might take some time. But he was getting work with the number one defense guys at G-Day. Now, again, we were really light on bodies, so maybe that was by default. I don't know. But he was getting legit reps with the number one defense, right? So I'm intrigued there. I don't know what to expect. We didn't see him at inside linebacker last year. We didn't see him at outside linebacker at Jack. So I don't know what to expect. What I can tell you is I liked him coming out of high school, but that was at inside linebacker. That's a different position. So, but that's just a name to kind of keep in mind there. At the very least, he's still a really, really talented athlete. I mentioned Chris Cole. I think Chris Cole can absolutely situation. I do think he will situationally play Jack for Georgia, especially on third downs based on opponent. And then you have two young guys, two freshmen, who, based on just the lack of depth there, lack of experience depth at the edge, I think could potentially see some snaps for Georgia this year, certainly if there are some injuries. And that's former five-star Isaiah Gibson. And I always mess this guy's last name up. I'll get it right eventually. Darren Ikeningbon. Those two guys, I think, are a little bit different. Gibson, I've always, coming out of high school, I thought that he would project maybe long-term more as a five-tech defensive end, maybe and more in line with like what we use with Michael Williams, because he was big, 6'3", 260 plus, coming out of high school. And I thought maybe if he was already that big coming into college, his body would probably just grow. He's not going to get smaller. Maybe he just grows into a five-tech that can play the edge situation, kind of the way we use Michael. But he was getting some work at Jack linebacker during the spring and was progressing as the spring went on. And I came along same thing. I actually heard a lot of good buzz about him at 6'5", 255. He's a little longer, not quite as strong at the point of attack as Gibson, but maybe a little bit more athletic as a pass rusher coming off the edge there. So those two guys, again, like ideally, if the guys ahead of them stay healthy and they produce the level that we hope that they are going to be producing at, they won't have to play a ton of snaps for Georgia, but they're two extremely talented players. And that goes back to my point, guys. I'm not saying that this is, I think there's a difference between best and most talented. The Georgia linebackers have not proven they are the best position in college football yet. They got to go out there and produce on the field. But from a sheer talent standpoint, I think you can absolutely make the argument. If you go up and down, inside linebacker and jack linebacker, as I just went out laying out every single player, all the talent that we've amassed in that room, you absolutely can look at Georgia's linebacker room as one of the more talented position units in all of college football. And the last player here I'm going to mention, I don't think he's going to play jack linebacker for us this year. I've kind of gone back and forth on this. When we lost Damon Wilson, when we lost all those guys in the NFL, I thought that Gabe Harris, who's been playing his first years at Georgia, going to year 3, he's been playing primarily at the 5-tech defensive end force. Okay. Now, he is a guy that when we recruited him out of high school, he was recruited ostensibly as a edge rusher, a jack linebacker, and his body kind of fit that profile. And we were, again, we had so many players that could play that position. He just wasn't going to get reps there. But we need maybe some body, some help at the 5-tech. And so we started to play him a little bit there. Now, my thing with Gabe at the 5-tech, at least his first 2 years, certainly his first year, he's a little undersized, man. Playing like 245 to 255 in that range. Like, you give us a little pass rush off the edge at the 5-tech, but you're not as strong at the point of attack. And the thing that we asked our 5-tech to do more, first and foremost, is set the edge, defend the run, and then you convert to pass rush. So I always felt like he was a little bit lighter than our typical 5-techs. He got bigger last year. And even though he wasn't always the biggest guy, he does have really good strength. He anchors pretty well for a guy that was a little undersized his first years. But one more time here, going back to Georgia's pre-fall camp combine, Gabe Harris allegedly came in like 6'4", 270. If that is the case, I don't think Gabe Harris is going to be playing edge for us this year. Like, I thought he would be the guy. Like, when Damon Wilson announced he was transferring, I was like, okay, like, now we're just going to move Gabe Harris back to his natural position, the position we recruited him at, really come out of high school. We'll move him back to jack linebacker because I think that's probably more in line with what his body is anyway. But then we went out and you get a guy like Elam Adozie, and it's like, okay, interesting. Do you go out and get a guy like that? Is a guy like that who's highly sought after in the portal? Is he going to come to Georgia if he thinks that we already have a guy like Gabe Harris who's probably going to start for us at that position? Probably not, right? It's complicating the outlook here is the fact that Gabe Harris had a shoulder injury during spring practice. So he didn't practice at all. So you kind of just left speculating, like, I wonder, could he go to jack linebacker? Or now they've got Madozie, does he stay at the 5-tech? Well, hearing those numbers, 6'4", 270, that's a 5-tech body. All right, he's certainly trending more towards the 5-tech than he is back to the jack linebacker position. I'm not saying he can't play situationally. Again, like Mykel Williams. Mykel Williams is, 270 in the 280-ish range. And against teams on standard downs that want to run the football, you can move Mykel over to that jack linebacker spot. I think you can do that with Gabe Harris as well some this year. And you get Joseph Jonah-Janye on the field that way. So I think that he gives us some versatility. But right now at that size, I don't think that Gabe is slated to be much of a factor at jack linebacker. I still think it's looking like we want him more at 5-tech, but we'll see. We'll see how that shakes out once we get to the season. But I just want to mention him because I don't think he's completely out of the picture there. But right now I would project him more as a 5-tech, at least going into fall camp. There you go, guys. That is the outlook for Georgia's extremely talented linebacker unit, both inside and the jack linebacker position. One more time, I want to make sure everyone hears me on this. Again, I'm not saying that Georgia's linebackers are the best unit in all of college football. That has to be proven on the field. But I think talent is a different argument, and that is the argument I'm making. And I do think there's a very strong chance that talent the insane amount of talent that we've amassed in that room can step up and break out this year and become one of the best units in all of college football. Well, all right, guys, thank you so much for being here and checking out today's episode. All you diehard Georgia fans, this is the kind of content you can expect here on this channel leading up to the start of the season and, of course, all the way through the 2025 season. So if you haven't already, go ahead, subscribe right now, turn those notifications on, like the video, comment, let me know what you think about Georgia's linebackers. Am I crazy? Am I completely off base in my estimation of the amount of talent in Georgia's linebacker room? Let me know, guys. But thank you again so much for being here. I'm Tyler, and as always, go Dogs!
Man, is there going to be some property destroyed tonight. 26-21. Dogs on top.